CLI and a cross-platform IDE for C and C++. Download now.
So, the road to agility, are we there yet? Now, you know that the Agile Manifesto has been there for many years, yeah? And we keep talking about being agile, not agile, and lots of the conversations around what there will be next, what are we doing now, is there anything more we can do, all these kind of things. And so this talk is a bit of an exploration of where we are coming from, where we are now, and then maybe where we might be going to in the future. There will be mentions about on AI, but let's say that I'm less confident than many that will actually be such a great revolution, in many respects at least. Yeah. Yeah. Now, you've seen this many, many times, yeah? The Agile Manifesto. Yeah, probably all of you know this, so that caused all sorts of conversations and things. I remember since it was there, people talking, you know, entire blogs dissecting every single phrase and saying this is wrong because, or this is right, you know, lots of stuff there. And then the principles actually are, to me, are a bit more interesting because there are things that you actually do here. You know, there is, we'll see a bit later, mentions about motivated individuals. This turns out to be a key point, yeah, to do good stuff. Yeah, or face-to-face conversation. Nowadays, face-to-face can be also via Zoom or video call, but still is a thing. Working software, again, that's a thing in most companies. Yeah, if the software doesn't work, you can have all the documentation you want, you have a problem. Yeah, and deliver frequently. Now it's common to actually deliver, you know, at least a few months for companies that used to deliver, you know, every few years. Yeah. So there are many things of the changing requirements stuff. Okay, so nowadays the changing requirements are a thing. So it's not anymore people grumbling about, oh, well, I mean, sometimes developers do in situations, especially when the requirements change every day, you know, at least wait 1 week, give us some time to do something. But it's not like when I started almost 30 years ago, where, you know, a change in requirement was a major disaster. The customer asked us to do this. Why they did that? You know, we had a contract here in place, and blah, blah, and then change boards and approvals and madness, yeah? Now it's normal, yeah? And then there are other aspects where we talk about all the time, you know, attention to technical excellence. I'll mention this as well, because some people didn't really pay attention to this particular principle. And other stuff. But anyway, so this is the typical start, yeah, for any Agile talk, at least, or many Agile talks during the years. But also, one thing that we see, maybe one thing that I should have said before this is that I wanted to say, actually, I forgot, obviously, how I came across all this Agile thing, because this was, I was working in Italy at the time, in 2000, actually, I'll go one slide back. I did not know anything about Agile or stuff. You see, even the internet connectivity was not great. I didn't have internet at home because it was expensive. So in the office it would work. So even the news didn't travel so fast, let's say, not as fast as today. But I think I can't remember the date, but was sometime before summer in 2000 that Martin Fowler came to Rome. I was there at the time. And I went to a workshop about analysis patterns. Some of you may remember that he wrote a book about that. So I went to the workshop. I also remember he had an incredibly bad cold, but he still ran the workshop. And at the end of the workshop, he actually mentioned the most interesting thing. He said, by the way, now there are these developments and there is this XP, extreme programming. People are doing this test-driven development, you know, automated testing and stuff. And that was, that's interesting. Never heard of automated testing in my life. You know, at the time when was common in many companies, at least in Italy, to just write the code and hope for the best. Yeah, try your thing, maybe run like many teams still do today. Yeah, deploy the thing somewhere, check, yes, seems to work. That caught my attention and is how I started to do things. And in that year, actually, with a small team, we had a chance to create a small system for a customer of my company. We decided, you know what? Let's try all this automated testing stuff. Yeah, it was C++, by the way. So we also paired without knowing that we were doing that. Yeah, because we worked together. And also mobbed, sometimes 3 of us. Yeah. And that was a revelation, because we managed to actually deliver something on time that was unheard of from our customers or us, that actually worked, to the point that the customer was so happy that told the senior manager how happy they were. Well, oh, this is how I kind of got caught into this agile thing. Yeah. And another thing too that I'd like to say is also one thing that I don't know how many of you noticed that, but well, someone should know that, is the people behind Agile Manifesto, initial Agile practitioners, were the same people behind the design pattern stuff. Yeah, especially the one, Ward Cunningham, who is the kind of hidden god of all of this. Yeah, because we've done this. He also, he has also some faults, because he invented the wiki, and then there was Confluence, which is a kind of wiki that is not necessarily a good thing. But so there were Kent Beck, Ward Cunningham, even Martin Fowler, all the people, the signatories and others were all involved in the design patterns movement. And this was interesting, because the thing is, that was a time where everybody was thinking, how can we do things better? How can we improve? What can we do to make development better, more reliable? There was a lot of conversation that actually started much earlier, also in terms of methodologies. It was not that much about waterfall, but was about incremental and iterative. Even the rational unified process, which was in the 90s, was incremental and iterative, a bit heavyweight, if you like, yeah, not very short feedback loops, but still the idea of having feedback loops was there. Barry Boehm started before that with spiral model again, this idea of iterating. And then, of course, Tom Gilp, who was the precursor of everything. If you talk about or write about anything, Tom has already written a book about it anyway, yeah. But jokes aside, Tom was really much ahead of his time. So if you look at the methodology, so Ivo here, is 1970s, because this is when he published something about it, okay? But actually it's much earlier, around the 50s, 60s. And this was one of the first proper agile methods in the way we look at them today, yeah? With iterations, feedback loops, and also incremental stuff, yeah? And then, of course, the other things that actually, predated agile but became agile, or maybe what the agile methods were based on. Crystal family of methodologies, Alistair Coburn, published around the 90s, but the work is from before, when he was at IBM, looking at how to make projects more, let's say, productive and make people work better. Scrum, which is the Scrum for software, is published in the 90s, but the reality is that Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber, what they did was formalizing something else. So it was based on Scrum. That was a process devised by other people, I think in Japan, Takeuchi and Nonaka, and they were describing how a team, I can't remember which car company, but they basically, no, it was not Toyota, I think, but anyway, I think it was Hyundai, maybe, I can't remember now. But anyway, basically a small team, like a Scrum team, as you would imagine today, actually designed and built a car. Okay, and they say, that's great, let's try this for software. And this, again, the 90s, they published a method. Extreme programming was actually described by Kent Beck in 1996. So everything, comes before that, yeah? So it's not that Agile was a thing that started in 2001 with the manifesto, of course. And in fact, what happened was that started much earlier, we'll see in a minute, but one thing also that has been interesting to me is that what happened to every single Agile method after the Agile Manifesto, pretty much whatever was extreme programming became part of it. All the technical practices, what we do, yeah, are based on what extreme programming was. Yeah, Scrum had no technical anything. Crystal Clear, again, says pretty much along the lines of, you know what, do what you think makes sense, yeah? But so basically create the structure you need without too many constraints. But XP is de facto became, the root for all the things that we also do today. Yeah, so if you see things like there are the values, communication, simplicity, feedback, courage, respect, yeah, all these things were explicitly mentioned in extreme programming, yeah. I have to say that we, even nowadays, don't really use them as we should, especially when we talk about simplicity or feedback, courage, and respect, depending on which company you are, can be quite difficult challenges, yeah? And also, you may notice that here, when we talk about psychological safety, nowadays psychological safety has become a thing, apart from the fact that the study started again in the 50s. But somehow, in the original agile practices and values, was in the air. Yeah? When you talk about feedback, courage, respect, feedback, respect has a lot to do with psychological safety. Yeah? Okay, so many things we are talking a lot about nowadays actually have some deep roots. And also some of the principles. I put some because there is a full list. Economics is basically do something that make economical sense. Yeah. So whatever system you are creating has to provide value, economical value to whoever buys it or creates it. Mutual benefit, and mutual means everybody involved, all the stakeholders. Yeah. So everybody has to benefit from it, including the developers. You have to learn something. You have to be able to enjoy what you are doing. There are these aspects. Improvement. Think about improving what you do in terms also the retrospectives, reflection. Yeah, improvement, reflections. Like we try to do better every time. Flow. Redundancy. This is a good one. This is a good one because redundancy is actually one thing where redundancy is in XP is in the pair programming. In teams nowadays is also mob programming. That is actually a risk reduction technique. Yeah, I'll mention this probably later a bit more. Quality, super important. Again, we'll talk about this again because this is one of the things we forget. Baby steps. Kent keeps talking about this. Even his latest book, Tidy First, is about that. Yeah, small thing, one step at a time. So it's quick feedback loops, baby steps. So you have control of what you are doing. Yeah, and accept the responsibility. Yeah, so you do the work, you accept, you are accountable for what you do. Yeah, this is again sometimes is difficult in some situations, but is important. Yeah. Now, and I forget also the practices. Even the modern practices, if you look at them, are evolutions of this. There is I don't know, weekly cycle, continuous integration. There is things related to the business, single code base, shell codes, code and tests. Yeah. Okay. One interesting aspect of everything here is that things didn't really start in 2001. Yeah, they started much earlier than that. Now, I'll show you some examples. And also, I'll do this not to prove you anything about Agile per se, in terms of we need to keep doing Agile because Agile is great because of the past. But I'll explain you later a bit more why I think it works and works well. Okay, so bear with me for a second. So iterative and incremental, mid-50s. Now, I'll read you something about the X-15 hypersonic jet. Okay, so was created with an iterative and incremental approach, a jet. We are not talking about software, yeah? You may see the hints that maybe that was a kind of large-scale project to start with, yeah? So this thing was operated by NASA and the Air Force. It was an experimental airplane, so it set some speed and altitude records in the 1960s, and actually is still the speed record, I think, for a manned airplane, which is around what is Mach 6.7. Okay, so they adopted an iterative and incremental approach to actually create this. Yeah. Some personnel that worked on that then ended up sitting in NASA early 60s Project Mercury, which applied iterative incremental. So what was Project Mercury? Was the work to actually try to send the first humans to space. So that was kind of, related to rocket science. Yeah. Okay, so you see, now, if you look at this, maybe you can understand where I'm getting at. It's like, even to do these physical things, engineering things, hard stuff that flies and go to space, there is an iterative and incremental approach. Start thinking about this. Yeah. And by the way, this is the X-15. Yeah, a picture of that jet. I'm not sure I would like to travel in that thing. It didn't even take off alone. It would be take off attached to another plane and then would be released in the air. Yeah. And this is the Project Mercury rockets. Yeah. Look, they are not really gigantic. Look at the man here. Yeah. But still, there's an iterative and incremental approach. But there is another interesting aspect about Project Mercury. They use test first development, planning and writing tests before each micro increment. They use TDD to create rockets. Yeah, of course, as always, it's not software, so probably the feedback loops are a bit longer, as you can imagine. Yeah, you write the test and then you have to build a rocket. But think about this. So before each increment, they say, okay, how are we going to test that we succeeded in this increment? And they thought that first. Yeah, and then they use also top-down development with stubs. Sometimes you call it, nowadays we call it outside in, which is, the London School of TDD, if you ever heard of it, is how you do TDD with stubs. So test doubles, yeah, mocks, stubs, fakes. So it's kind of, there is a long history about these things. And then, of course, there is also the famous NATO paper from the conference in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, where somebody says, well, software system can best be designed if the testing is interlaced with the designing instead of being used after the design. Yeah. Okay, so this is again hints at test first and anyway writing the test at the same time, which incidentally you can look at this as influencing having a kind of design for testability approach. Yeah, so if you want a system to be designed so that you can test it, you cannot create the system and then try to test it because probably you didn't think about the appropriate hooks to put there to run an appropriate test. Yeah. Now, other things, pair programming. Now, there is apparently Fred Brooks in the 50s, he wrote in some private communication that he and his friend Bill Wright produced some defect, he was 1,500 lines of defect-free code. Now, 1,500 lines probably the time were, kind of more difficult nowadays for something, but it's kind of defect-free code. So it was like, we worked together, and somehow there were no bugs. And then in the mid-70s, Larry Constantine documented the dynamic duos, basically people working in pair, and in one of his papers actually said, when you have a dynamic duo, actually they are as effective as 3 people. Yeah. So again, this was something that was already there. Yeah. And then, of course, continuous integration. There was Microsoft, the sync and stabilize method. There is a book written by Michael Kuzumano about how Microsoft did software because it was from the mid-80s. I think the book, because Microsoft at that time was really surprising, compared to everybody else. He said, how do they manage to do this? And they had daily builds. So developers, by a certain time of the day, I think was, 2 p.m., had to check in their code, which would run in the daily build. Yeah, this is a level of continuous integration. Of course, the available hardware and resources were not what we have today, yeah, but they used them for this. And by the way, they had also other things. They had small teams. They didn't really have much very formal processes, yeah. And by all means, they were working on really large-scale projects. We are talking about Windows NT, we are talking about Word, Excel, all projects that by today's standards are actually large-scale. Yeah, keep in mind these as well for the next few slides. And then the human aspects. Yeah, when they say the principle build projects around motivated individuals. Now, there is work on teamwork and motivation that dates from at least the 60s, if not before this. One more time, how do you motivate employees is paper written by researchers was Frederick Herzberg for the Harvard Business Review in 1968 or earlier, where he talks about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation and why and how people work and want to do things. Yeah. Then in 1982, Barry Boehm, Software Engineering Economics book, actually he wrote explicitly about motivation being one of the most important factors for productivity and quality. Okay. Then there is this book. This is more recent. It's end of 80s, of beginning of 90s, is some research around teamwork. And the two guys, Larson and LaFasto, and they wrote also some other books, and there is some other research around that, around how the team dynamics, how they work, and what they need to work properly, yeah, to do a good job. Yeah, and they come across, and what they found was, you know, the usual stuff that actually is being confirmed by Google. You remember the Google research, I think it was 2003, that at some point people say, Google found this, that in their teams, these dimensions are super important. Everybody was just a confirmation of studies that were there before. Yeah, so having an impact, psychological safety. So this is around trust, yeah, of the people you work with, and ability to respect and talk with each other. Structure and clarity. Here there is also, structure and clarity means also clear goals. A team to work well needs to know what they are supposed to achieve. Yeah. Dependability, you can trust your teammates. So it's always the same things, yeah, that we keep rediscovering all the time, okay? And then immediately after the Agile Manifesto, this was around 2003, so the Agile Manifesto 2001, the Poppendick, Mary and Tom Poppendick, they wrote a book about Lean software development and making the connection between the two, Agile and Lean, which some connections were already there, yeah? Anything around amplifying learning or deliver as fast as possible, you know, with the continuous loops, empower the team, build conceptual integrity. In this, you can see this as part of the attention to quality, yeah? See the whole, so just don't go the small thing. But things like, I think that one of the interesting contributions is the decide as late as possible, yeah? So it's kind of postpone the decisions until you have sufficient information. Yeah. So basically, what is the point here? The point is that the Agile Manifesto was, first of all, was not a starting point. It was a milestone of a long time of different ideas that have been there all the time, but somehow were not really taken seriously. Yeah. And the last bit here is also the emphasis on small teams, collocation, and physical tools. This is important for current times as well, some differences. But let's say that these ideas that were kind of not taken seriously, before the Agile Manifesto, the methodologies like Evo, Crystal, Scrum were not called Agile, we are called lightweight. Now, you know that lightweight has some negative connotations, yeah? When we say that somebody is a lightweight, say this person is not a deep thinker, he doesn't have knowledge, yeah? But also, now I'll give you my take on this, okay? So I'm not talking from the point of view of the expert, but my take on this is, the reality is that for a long time, the conversation in software has been about the wrong things, because we completely misunderstood our metaphors. So when people talk about waterfall, the importance of using something like waterfall with design up front for a big system, yeah? What they had in mind at some point was, because this was a typical example of buildings, what they saw is an engineer that draws the blueprint and then somebody building the building according to the blueprint. What the people that used the metaphor didn't see was the fact that the blueprint was not the starting point. The starting point in any new building, if you ask, you know, of course, not the kind of run-of-the-mill house identical to others that has been already built, but say a major skyscraper, something completely new. The starting point is never the blueprint. The starting point is sketches, is prototypes, iterating on the prototypes, looking at making prototypes with an idea of the impact on the surroundings. So there is a lot of work there, yeah, before deciding how to construct the thing, okay? And that is highly iterative process, yeah? And it's incremental as well. Yeah. Incidentally, it's also how cars are designed. Now, I was reading recently about the Toyota approach and the American approach at some point where the difference was in the design, not the production, the design. What Toyota did was, you know what, we have some constraint in terms of time, price, technical skills and stuff, and they will come up with different potential ideas for the same car that would fit those constraints, and then develop them to a point until at some point they would actually start filtering things out based on, refining these ideas, and they would converge to a design that was, the best according to the work done. Now, apparently, they tended to converge to a final design later than the Americans, because the Americans, instead, what they did was, okay, we want to do this. They would come with one design, just one idea, and just refine that particular idea. So the convergence was quicker, but then the end product was better intuitive, and actually, globally, they were also able to be faster, because the way they converged to the idea was actually more effective. Yeah? Okay, so there is iteration there as well. Now, what is the point? The connection here. All the things that we saw about Agile so far is all about exactly about the fact that we as humans, we work in the same way. We are tinkerers. We need feedback loops. To understand the problem, we need to try stuff out, yeah, try ideas, get the feedback, and decide what to do next. Yeah? And this is completely independent on the particular field you work on. Yeah, we try stuff out, and then we see it works, doesn't work, do something else. Even the famous artists, that when they do sculptures or paintings, what they did was sketching things out. Yeah, and actually, in some paintings, lots of sketches. Then they start painting, and they say at some point, "Oh, I don't like this anymore. Scrap it." Again, feedback. What is the difference in software compared to the rest? That is software. So my take is that the difference in software is that we are in a position where we can actually understand the problem and deliver something that actually solves part of it and deliver some value at the same time. Yeah? Okay? Because otherwise, we could do waterfall, work very well with waterfall. We could model, prototype, sketch, yeah? Iterate and say, okay, now we understand what the system we want to build. And then we can build that using a waterfall approach. So that would become just a construction phase, if you like. But we don't do this because it would cost us much more time. So this is my take on it. So this is what is, I think, a fundamental thing that we missed for a long time, and some people still miss. It's not about agile works or waterfall works, so you need big upfront or so. This kind of backtrack a bit. How do humans think and work? Yeah. And even when you think, in my view, about, I don't know, formal specifications and things, they could be useful sometimes, but we are not logical beings. For us, it's difficult to be precise and accurate. So this is also probably why things like formal specifications are extremely difficult for us to pick up. Yeah. But we work well in ambiguity, and we need some kind of continuous feedback. Yeah. So to me, this is the parallel that we need to look at. Yeah. So when we look at other professions to find out inspiration, we should spend some time to actually look into them in more depth instead of stopping at the first superficial things we see. Yeah. Of course, now when we had Agile, there was some impact on job roles. There are always side effects. Yeah. So one thing that happened was QA was not a separate function anymore. Yeah, so there were two major approaches. We don't need testers, and they got the sack. This was what many companies did, which was not a very clever thing. Or the other was embed them in the teams. But the problem with the second one was, what do we do with them? I've been in teams with and without testers, both successful and unsuccessful with both mixes. And now I'm working in a team with testers. What we do with them is work with them. So we are actually mobbing with them as well. And even if they don't understand C++, they can actually ask questions when we do stuff or propose solutions, even if the solution is not a C++ code. It's more a kind of, have you considered this idea if we do this? And the contribution is excellent. And what they did in testing is not the kind of human automator, follow the script, do things. They can do real exploratory testing, which is the testing that is actually value-added testing. Yeah. But anyway, caused some stir there. And then the other thing, especially at the beginning, was about project managers. You remember, especially Scrum was really strong against project managers. They are useless, we don't need them, go away. And then you remove project managers, they go away as project managers and come back with the new clothes. I'm your new Scrum Master. Yeah. But this was a serious problem at some point. Remember also, I think Google at some point, they decided to remove all the middle layers, project management, and then they said, now we understand what they did. Hire them back. Yeah. Yeah, but it caused an impact, and there were all sorts of conversations on why these people were useful or useless, depending on who you asked. Yeah, so this was a major impact on the job role from the Agile Manifesto time. Then there were, of course, all sorts of early success stories. Yeah, let me see so there were some, I think Amazon, if I'm not mistaken, was an early adopter. So they came up with small teams, and they did 2 pizza teams, which was give a different name to the thing we are already doing anyway. And Google, I think. But then there were also lots of pilots, small projects. Another one that was famous one was the Sabre Airline Solutions. I think Sabre is they do the systems for the various airliners to actually connect the bookings and do all this stuff that is pretty complex stuff. And so apparently they said they evaluated the effects of extreme programming practices within a team that had some, they say, some plan-driven risk factors. And the case study found that the Sabre team yielded above average post-release quality and average to above average productivity. Okay, so this was another success story. And then there are others. So lots of small teams. There isn't a lot of documented stuff out there. There was a lot of, lots of teams doing interesting stuff, but was not really published. I know of a team in an investment bank in London. They did great work. I think Steve Freeman was there. So they did something that I think before them were unable to do. They were using XP, they were using all the practices, and they were extremely successful. I myself, I wrote also about some stuff I did in Cambridge with a small team there where we created our own Agile methodology. It was a team of 3 or 4. And we basically recreated the software they used there to manage the database with the genomic information, human genome. So was for the biological community was a big deal. Yeah, C++ again, but we used TDD, all this sorts of stuff, and that thing just worked. Okay, small team, and that was I think also my first talk at ACCU in 2005. I presented that here. I was, and an interesting aspect is that I had lots of conversations about that, also with some other Agile people about the approach. I distinctly remember a conversation with Tim McKinnon. Now, Tim McKinnon, if you don't know him, is one of the people that with Steve Freeman and Phil Craig wrote the first paper about mock objects. Yeah. So the mock objects that everybody uses, not everybody knows that were actually created in London by these people. Yeah, part of the Extreme Tuesday Club community. And I remember talking to him that he was basically telling me, no, if you want to do a methodology, you have to do XP, you have to do all the 13 practices, I think. Otherwise, it's not XP. My position was, I don't care. What I do is I start from something that I can do, yeah, and then based on that, add or remove or change, because you cannot start something all at once. You need learning time. And also you have people that have different skills to start with and different ways of learning things. So you cannot take everything at once. It's like going to school and studying a subject. You say you study this all at once in 1 week, the big book. It just doesn't work. Okay, so I had a more incremental thing. So I guess that my approach was closer to Alistair Cockburn Crystal approach. Yeah, do something that makes sense with sufficient structure to actually understand what you're doing. Yeah. And so we had some success stories there. So there was plenty of this. Yeah. But not a lot documented. I think the only documentation we saw is from some large companies. And more recent ones, I remember I also know that some large companies that documented their own success stories, for some of them where I saw that from the inside, what they documented was not exactly what they did. Let's put things this way. But let's stop here. There was also a problem of one team I was working at some point in a particular place. The team was kind of dysfunctional for several reasons. But then we had some researchers that came to study the team. And what happens in those situations, people lie. So everybody presented everything as if we were doing great stuff. Yeah, so that particular project seemed to be another kind of success story. No, but it's not. Let's say maybe lie is the wrong, but it was a kind of self-protection, yeah, because it was not a healthy environment. Yeah. Well, it's like it happens everywhere, even with family. Sometimes we may have problems in the family, but we don't tell other people. We show our best selves because we want to deal with those things ourselves. Yeah. We don't do that. So, there were also some of these aspects. Yeah.
Some of the histories of a success story.
Who? Sorry. Luca. Okay, so Luca was talking about success story. You say Luca? Yeah. We are old men. We tell each other always the same stories now. And then there is, of course, some evolution. Yeah. So here I highlighted some points. So I put large scale first because large scale was for a long time a point of conversation, but is also what is happening. All small teams at some point in organization grow large. Yeah, even startups start with 5, 10 people and they go up. We are a scale up now, we have 70 people, 100 people, whatever. Yeah. Then regulated industries. The regulated industries, again, is another one that is for a long time. You cannot do agile in regulated industries because of reasons. I think that one of the main reasons was actually the fact that at the beginning was all paper, index cards, whiteboards and stuff. Regulated industries, you need traceability. Yeah, it's really difficult to have traceability with a pack of cards put somewhere. Yeah, because you need the traceability for if you have a bug, understand when the bug was put in and what happened, what you need to improve, and all this kind of stuff. Then some advances in tools. Yeah, faster machines, cloud, and all. And then some changes in practice. But let's scale. I think I'll take that for a bit at length later. But the regulated industry is an interesting one because for a long time said that was impossible. Now, the reality was it was perfectly possible, but was really enabled when we started using digital tools. Yeah. So I have direct experience with this with the COVID app in England and Wales. The COVID app in England and Wales was considered a medical device. Okay, being a medical device meant that you had to trace lots of information and go through some specific processes. But the teams were actually agile teams the way we were working, really, in everything. Yeah. The fact is that we made sure that we could trace what we were doing properly. Yeah, and now I think is accepted, but also I think also more and more industries are using this kind of approach because they figured out how to do that. But for a very long time, there were long conversations about that. It's impossible because of reasons. You have to have the big design up front and all sorts of stuff. But was actually not correct. The tools again. The evolution. I think there was an element of. Let's put things this way. So the tools evolved and allowed us to refine the practices or apply the practices in new contexts. Yeah. Now, large-scale agile probably was possible even with index cards anyway. I mean, or limited tools, maybe spreadsheets. Microsoft, the sync and stabilize process was by all means an agile process and everything. And this was mid-80s. There was no Jira at the time. Yeah. Unfortunately, now we have it, but that's it. But the fact that electronic tools, what they enabled was better management of bigger projects, better traceability and communication. But also there is the other aspect. I think the most interesting tools, apart from faster machines for me, is the video conferencing ones, because that opened the doors to distributed teams, yeah, which made a gigantic difference. Yeah, and also I think they changed the conversation about what is actually possible and what working face-to-face means. Yeah, I give you again personal anecdote. When I hear people are more productive in the office because if they work from home and blah blah, they really don't work well. There is no serendipity, everything. When I was working, the COVID app was fully distributed, obviously, because in COVID times, you remember, we were isolated. We used some video conferencing tool. I think we used Microsoft Teams. Not the best, but this is what the company had. And was interesting, the dynamics were actually incredibly good dynamics. Yeah, at some point, I led a team, and I talk about that in other talks, when I talk about more programming in a kind of challenging environment, where we had to do something, a system for behind in the backends of the COVID app. And basically the team was, somebody came to me and said, okay, Giovanni, you have to lead this system. By the way, this is your team. People that I never heard of. Same company, but we are distributing in various places in Europe, in UK, and also in Asia. And we had very short amount of time to actually get something out of the door, because whatever we did there was make sure that Johnson could keep his promises with the population. Yeah. What happened? We use mobbing, in that case, lots of pairing, but especially mobbing. There was real gelling in the team. We really worked well. There was no problem of, we are not physically in the same environment. We cannot do this, it's not going to work. Nothing like that. But also the interactions were such that I've never met those people in person ever, except one of them, well, and of course one or two that were in UK, but one of them that was in Austria. When last year I went to a conference in Vienna and I told him, look, I'm coming to Vienna, can we meet? We met, and it was like meeting an old friend. So when I hear all this back to the office for productivity and stuff, that is, to me, is nonsense. Yeah? And this nonsense that people peddle maybe for their own reasons, but also because they think that remote work is like being in the office, just distributed, but it's not the same thing. You have to organize the work differently. Yeah? Okay, so the tools actually opened up lots of opportunities. And some of the opportunities are actually even more interesting, because when in that project we did more programming, now, you know that if you're in the same office, well, at the time where everybody was in the office, nowadays, even with the hybrid work, offices are often half empty. But when everybody was in the office, it's like, we need a room today for mobbing. Yeah, no problem. How long do you need it? Well, 6 months? It's like, no, impossible. When you are distributed with a video conferencing, you don't need a room, which has some additional advantages. You can give it a try without telling anybody, without people putting pressure on you on doing something else. Yeah. So you see, it's not, to me, they opened up possibilities. Yeah. The practices, in a way, I think, evolved, but are still the same. Yeah, when we go to continuous deployment now, it's still not really widespread. Yeah, but it's there. It's enabled by the various tools we have now. Yeah, especially in the cloud, may simplify lots of work, lots of simplified work for continuous integration and deployment. In old times was much more difficult. Now we can automate a lot of that. Yeah, so somehow we evolved that. There hasn't been a real revolution in the practices themselves. It's more of a refinement. We can do more because we have more power. But there isn't anything that has changed fundamentally. Yeah. And even when we talk about, new practices. Now, one that is new to teams in a company was the pull and merge request. This came with GitHub. I think GitHub went publicly available in 2008, more or less. And basically what happens with the merge and pull request, helped smooth out a process that was already used in the open source community. Yeah. The problem is that companies try to use an open source community process for a context that is very different. Okay, so this is not a talk about those, but I can tell you that I really don't like pull and merge requests. We can talk about that in front of a beer. But this kind of is not really new, is applying something that some other communities were doing by sending patches via email, mostly. Yeah, putting that out there with different tools. Ensemble and mob programming. This is not really new because we were already doing that. It's kind of, we didn't just have a name. It's kind of, hey, Alan, can you and Luca come and have a look with me at this because we have a problem? We did that. Yeah. But this became a thing. It's a kind of, extreme programming when you turn the volume up a little bit. Yeah. Which incidentally is a practice that I strongly recommend to give it a try if you haven't tried that. More automation. And this is, again, because of what we said before about the tools. DevOps, I mean, it's not really new. It's a new name for something that was there. Yeah, I worked previously in teams that were pretty much, if you build it, you run it, or working with operational people that were separate team, but actually talking to them for real and doing stuff with them. Yeah, this was more putting an emphasis when it was born. The person that invented this was to make a point that the developers really need to talk with the operations people because, as I see them, they are customers. They just have a different needs. Yeah, they use the system via different APIs, but they are a class of customers. But we don't care about them because they don't pay us. Yeah. And then perhaps the additional of recognition of user experience by people in the teams. This was not really a thing for a long time, even if the studies around human-computer interaction are quite old, which some UX people, unfortunately, don't know about those studies, so they come up with all sorts of interesting ideas, again, reinventing the past. Yeah, as we did, and we keep doing, they do the same. But adding this kind of, basically adding to the team different professional specialities, if you like. Yeah, this was a difference, noticeable difference from how things were done mostly before by many. Yeah. And then, behold, certifications. Now, they started with Scrum. They were very fast on the start because 2001 Agile Manifesto, 2002 I think there was the first Scrum Master certification. Yeah. Now I don't particularly hate certifications. Now having a situation where you can set an amount of time to study something, for me is fine. Yeah, you learn. The problem I have is that selling this as a way to make you an expert. Yeah, if you think about it, even the wording is a bit, you are now a Scrum Master. Yeah, sounds important. And so I think they lost their meaning in many ways. Yeah, because there was Scrum and now there is SAFe and all the large scale methods, they have their own certifications. I had once to take SAFe training, as in SAFe the method, not as safe in safety. If anything, that was a bit reckless. But because a customer of the company was working for at the time requested that. And that was quite an eye-opening experience. Before that, I had actually quite a bit of experience consulting for large-scale projects. When I say large-scale, the largest I consulted at the time before that training was around 700-800 developers, okay? We are talking 70-80 teams, many in India, some in Ireland, some in Spain, and I was hired by the head of this division in this big company to basically say, help us, figure out something to make these things work. And what you had in that training was, the instructor didn't have real experience in this context. They couldn't answer my questions. Yeah. Okay, so it felt like selling something to make money more than a learning experience. And the point is also, get the certification and now what? I'm a newly minted Scrum Master. I've never been a Scrum Master before. I've never led a team. I never led anybody. What do I do? Yeah? What do I do? Well, I'm a Scrum Master. What I do is, you shall have a stand-up now. I said, but Giovanni and Luca, we sit next to each other. We talk all the time. This is what Scrum says. Yeah, so this is the kind of, I mean, not, of course, not everybody was this. There were very good ones around, but this is the kind of dynamics, yeah, that set in motion also the, what I'll show you later, all the, say, dislike for Agile coaching, yeah. And now let's see where we are now. Yeah, so I said where we start from. So Agile, the manifesto was a kind of a milestone, was not a starting point. I gave you an explanation of things that were already there, yeah, and the quote from Boehm saying, well, it's a repackaging of all the ideas, which is correct. I gave you my take on why those ideas are actually good in terms of the way we as humans work and think. Yeah, explain what things are happening, but where are we now with all this Agile stuff? What is happening at the moment? Yeah. Oops. So depending on who you ask, I have my machine here that is, well, so I think actually I was jumping ahead myself. So the way we are now, let's start with Agile coaching first. Now, what I said about what is happening that is like. Now, what is happening in many teams, the Agile coaches became kind of Agile UMRLs. In UMRL is a kind of, this is the definition from Wikipedia for you. Yeah. They come there that have, you see, they don't really have experience in terms of understanding how the teams work, and they still want to tell them how to do stuff. Yeah. I mean, in Italy, some people start young, really in working age. Like, you know, we have some that do roadworks, and the typical joke is that all of them grow a column here, because usually what happens is there is one with a shovel doing stuff, and everybody else is like this with their own, who looking around and then actually giving directions. Yeah. But this is a real thing. So it's not that all of them are like this, but a lot are. Yeah, this is causing a bit of, it's caused a bit of, we don't like them. In fact, in many teams nowadays, you don't find Agile coaches anymore. Yeah, or people that have the title. Maybe they do the job, but do also something else. Yeah. And then, depending on who you ask with Agile, Agile is dead, Agile has failed, Agile has won, or what is we are waiting for post-Agile. Each of these, for me, is total nonsense. All of them. There is no dead, failed, won, post-Agile. I know that Agile dead also was a talk by Dave Thomas, Prague Dave, but that was a different perspective. It was more about being annoyed with the fact that people were basically using a tick box approach to doing stuff. Yeah, stand up, check, retrospective, check. You know, we do this check. It's like, but is what we are doing any good? No, but but we are doing Agile. Yeah, so it was a reaction to this, which is understandable. But others say, yes, it's not, it's dead, it's not a thing anymore. Post-Agile, this is bullshit, because even if you consider what I told you before about all that, how we work, all this iterative and process, and the way we as humans work, that stuff is there to stay. We'll keep working that way. Yeah. So that is not going away. Nobody has had any better ideas on how we should work to improve in terms of how we should learn, how we should approach problem solving. Yeah. But also we made some progress. Yeah. So more automated testing by developers. Now, I say more, it's not great everywhere, but there is more, at least is a thing. Yeah. Before the Agile Manifesto, even saying developers, you create tests, they go, oh, go away. This is stuff for QA people. I'm a developer, it's not a tester. Yeah. Automated builds. Again, I remember the times of manual builds, that were great. You could spend days trying to build something, even small, yeah? A closer distance with the users, not as close as you should be, but a bit closer. Yeah, at least there is a concept of somebody telling the developers, look, this is a product that does this for our users. Yeah, for a while it was not even that. Yeah, do this, create this system, but what do the users do with it? That is not your concern. Yeah, less separation between QA and devs, which is good. Yeah, I see them as people that have professionals with a set of skills that is complementary. Yeah. Incremental development finally is being recognized because for years, the big design, and then you have to design everything and design until you finish the entire system. The system is not done, you cannot deliver. Yeah. More frequent releases, as we said, we can do even one release every 6 months nowadays, if you're fast. But it's a thing again, this thing about continuous releasing and effective distributed teams. Yeah, this is important. To me, the thing is that distributed work is here to stay. Yeah, and this is actually a good thing. Yeah, I work a lot from home. We mob all the time also with the team that I joined recently, and it's fine. Occasionally we go to the office, but that actually created, when we talk about sustainable development, that added sustainability to my life. Yeah, if I can save hours of travel every day, to go to the office, and I can work effectively from home, I can also see my daughters more often. I can go to school events. I can do, you see, that sustainability in development is not simply work 8 hours per day. It's also don't be burned out by what you do. Yeah. Okay. And then there is the large scale bit. That is with Luca, we always talk about this stuff. So the large scale, again, I'm insisting on this because, as we said, has a big impact. Every project seems to become large scale at some point of its lifetime. Yeah. Now, again, what we said before, initially Agile methodology says unsuitable. You need big design up front, and we say, well, it's not the case, and we show also, you can make rockets in a way that is not big design up front. You can make pretty much everything. Yeah. As I said before, we had the wrong metaphors. And also, we had the situation of people actually misunderstanding what documentation means and what kind of bureaucracy means in a project. Yeah. Some people say, we hate all of this. This is bullshit. We don't do that, which is wrong. Yeah. Sometimes there are things that are needed. Yeah. And also, large scale, actually, as I said before, Microsoft was doing something large scale in the mid-80s. Jeff Sutherland published about the Scrum of Scrums, I think in doing that 1993 or 1996. So basically, there was large scale stuff done there. People could see and kept saying, nah, you cannot do large scale. Yeah. These are some notable large scale methods. If you tell me which one to pick, go for ETC. Okay. If you want a rant about this, catch myself and Luca in the bar, and then we can entertain you for a night ranting about. But the major problem with these methods is the fact that they are frameworks and as such, they expect a specific context to be effective. Unfortunately, different projects have different contexts. And so people that use SAFe, that is probably the most popular, try to shoehorn their context into the context needed by the framework, and they end up in a mess. This is a typical horror story of Agile stuff, and people like him and me are called sometimes to help them get out of the mess. Yeah. Also, there is another aspect with large scale. Large scale is often not a solution, but is a symptom of a problem. Again, I'm insisting on this because if you work on any project that has some success, you'll end up with this at some point in your professional life. It's more often a symptom of a problem. So what do I mean with this? So I blogged about this some time ago, and I said, you know what? I've seen a few, not only the super big project, I've seen quite a few large-scale projects with hundreds of people for which I consulted directly. And I said, well, most projects are scaled up because they don't fulfill the prerequisites for scaling. I'll show them in a moment. Yeah. This is a paradox, and I'll show you what the prerequisites are. And the second one is projects fulfilling the prerequisites for scaling have a lesser need to scale. Prerequisites, clear shared goals. Everybody understands what you are doing. I can guarantee you that in most large-scale projects I've seen, you ask 10 people, you have 20 different answers because they are also uncertain. Okay, so there is lack of clarity on the goals. And so everybody pulls in a direction they think is the good one. High quality standards. Quality is often a problem, especially when there is time pressure. Because also developers have this wrong thinking of to go faster, I cut on quality and I don't create tests. Yeah, stuff like this, which is, I mean, to make a long story short, developers that don't create tests, what they do is do something, deploy, check if it works. I'm not sure. Add some logs, deploy again, check if it works. Of course, when you deploy, it's the development environment shared by everybody and say, oh, look, Giovanni is testing, you stay away. And then check again the logs and say, this time I see that happening. Actually, I had this conversation with some people and say, how do you call this? This is called testing. But it's very brittle, yeah, and not repeatable. Yeah. But anyway, there is data about quality improving speed as well. Yeah. Architecture suitable for scaling. Yeah. This is another big one. Yeah, often you have teams, all of them, different teams, but with the same shared code base, but we throw more team at the problem because we want to go faster, and then we create an enormous contention there. Yeah, a gigantic lock. Yeah. Plenty of efficient and effective automation. We are automating more, but sometimes in many of these projects is actually not sufficient. Effective and efficient communication channels. We have plenty of Slack channels and it's just communications everywhere, but it's like, the cat in the hat fish, talks a lot, but does it say anything? It's like there is a lot of talking, but often it's not clear what is important that is being communicated. Yeah. People with necessary management and technical skills. This is a big one. Often you have managers that are unable to actually manage, or leaders that cannot lead anybody. But also I've seen more and more often, I think I'll probably talk a bit more about this also in a minute, lack of skills in developers. This is a serious problem. I interview people, okay? Especially when I interview people for senior positions. I'm lucky if after I interview 10, 20 of them, I find one that is actually half decent. And I'm not talking about Google-style interviews, algorithms, or anything like this. Yeah. My impression is that we are in a situation where people go less in depth with their knowledge. So I ask people, how do you learn? Very few go to conferences. Almost, this is a self-selected small crowd. Reading books is not a thing anymore. YouTube videos and random blogs. Now, some blogs, we were discussing this with Kevlin yesterday, could be good, okay? But the thing is that most of them are not, and it's very difficult to judge quality. And what you get is very superficial knowledge. And you have plenty of people with very superficial knowledge that think they are experts. I see this again and again, yeah? It's not that they are bad, they don't know any better often, yeah? Then when you expose those people to different ways of thinking, they can learn much faster, but this doesn't happen by itself. Yeah. Now, I don't know, I don't have data in my hands to see if it was different when I was younger. So I don't want to make the mistake of thinking, in my times, things were different, my generation, this kind of crap. Okay, but certainly, yes, it's always been like that way. But yes. Probably you're right. Alan says it's always been that way. It's humans, yeah?
My impression. That's almost the opposite, but
No, but yeah. But this is a thing. And actually, I don't like when I hear people, to do this, forget technical skills. The important thing is that they are great communicators and team players. It's like, no, you don't forget anything. The important thing is that they are great communicators and great technical skills, and pretty much they actually are well-rounded. Not necessarily superb at anything, but well-rounded. Yeah. Appropriate metrics. We throw more people at the system and we go faster. Are you sure? How do you know that you're going faster? Usually they don't. Yeah. User stories, requirements that actually are understandable. This is another one. Yeah. Especially the confusion between vague and big. This is an epic. Now, the epic initially was a user story that was so big that was difficult to estimate. But to say you cannot estimate because it's big, it still means that you have clarity on what you have to estimate. You have clarity on what you need to do. It's just there is a lot, and so you are quite unsure. Nowadays, instead, I write something that nobody quite understands, and I call it an epic because it's very unclear. Yeah. Prioritization and planning is another thing, is a big problem. Yeah, I'll mention this again. If you are unable to prioritize and plan, you cannot really go large. You cannot do small. Yeah. Okay. So these are things that are actually prerequisites that are generally not satisfied by most large-scale projects. Yeah. In fact, to the point that, as a friend of mine used to say, the number of developers you need in your team is the minimum between the one you have and 10. Yeah. Okay. So you see, some problems I already mentioned, lack of prioritization and focus, again, first of the line, because that is actually one of the things, my job is often this. Talk to people and say, what is important? Is really important. In a previous consulting gig where I was asked to coordinate a big effort to do something about 7 teams, I kept asking senior management because they say, yeah, we'll do this, we'll focus the teams. I told them, look, we need focus here. You want to finish this on time, we are short in time. The teams have to be focused on this work and nothing else. Doesn't matter how small. And then they will go sideways. And then Giovanni was there. Ta-da. Now, why are you doing this? Yeah, it's just a small thing. Adds risk to your main thing. Is this so important that you want to add risk to this? Yeah? Yeah, important. Okay, no, we can avoid that. Good. You see, so it's kind of, my job was keeping them focused on what they said was important. We managed to deliver because of that, but it was a job of reminding everybody. Yeah. Unclear requirements, as I said, this is a big, always. Lots of talk about psychological safety. You can tell me anything and give me feedback. And then you give me feedback, Giovanni, what you did there, I think I would have done this differently. You are sacked. Yeah, this is what you see in some companies. Yeah, they want, because if you ask anybody, they are open for feedback. They want open conversations. They want open everything. Then you have the open conversation and you put yourself at risk. Yeah. The company silos are still there. Yeah, to the point that now we have DevOps with DevOps engineers separate from the developers, which is something that drives me nuts. Now they have the engineers, the DevOps, and the Ops. Now, what are these people doing? Yeah. A tick box approach to methodologies, mentioned before. Yeah, you do Scrum, stand up. Retrospective, and then retrospective. Everybody moans and whines and stuff. Okay, we have done the retrospective. Let's now go and do something else. Is there any actions, any real? No. Yeah, all this kind of approach of going through the motions, hoping for something good to happen. No iterations. Now, this one, people often talk about incremental and iterative. Most efforts, there are no iterations at all. Iteration is not a Scrum sprint. That is not an iteration. That is just an amount of time. Iteration is when you do something, you put it out there, somebody uses it, and then somebody says, you know what, I want this a bit more and a bit less. I say, oh, okay, good. Take it. Second pass to the same thing, and you refine it. That is the iteration. You go over the same thing, refining it until it's good enough. It's where the learning happens. Yeah. Instead, what happens often nowadays, you have the design sprint. We did the UXers alone, we don't know developers, that come up with a perfect design of everything, forgetting that will actually dictate aspects of the architecture of the system. Yeah? And so there is no real iteration, no real learning there. That's a major problem. So there is incremental, we add functionality, but we don't iterate over it. And this applies also to refactoring. Refactoring is a way of iterating over. You go there, you need to make space for new features, you go, some part of the code base that is already there, you refine it, you make space for the new feature, you put it there. No, nowadays we don't do this. Nowadays we are experts of technical debt. I just add a new feature, and then I have the technical debt ticket somewhere, which incidentally is not technical debt the way Work Cunningham intended, in my view, because Work Cunningham was not like do a hacky job that you don't even test. Was more, for tactical reasons now, we choose this way because it's faster than the better way, but whatever we are doing is actually tested, still works, still we know that it works. It's just not optimal for what we'll need, what we know we'll need in the immediate future. It's a very different thing. Now we do a bad job and call it technical debt. Yeah, the two things are very different. And the general lack of skills in teams. Yeah, okay, I already mentioned before. And then it's like, okay, so what should we do? So it's like we are here, yeah, and that's so. What should we do to improve the situation here? Yeah. Now, usually when you hear about agile, how to become more agile, everybody starts on the top, commitment from senior leaders and cultural change, and lots of stuff. The reality is, you can do up to a point, depends on the context where you are. You can usually do something. It's rare the situation where you can do a lot. You can change the system, but doesn't matter where you are in the system. You can probably improve at least that part or influence the border and maybe, go and influence more and more, okay? So things like helping teams or some areas to focus more with priorities, depending. So in some jobs, like the previous one, I was hired as an interim head of engineering, which means I had management duties to 6 teams, and so respond to the director of engineering, which means at that level, you can actually have a bigger span of influence. And you can do a bit more. But sometimes when you're a developer, you can do some things at least. Yeah, at least improve with your testing, your code quality, and then maybe somebody will notice that your team actually doesn't have any defects. Yeah, so it's not about the grand transformation of the company. It's more about what can we do in the context where we are. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you typical book management thing, you need a cultural transformation with the CEO fully committed. That's, yeah, well, nice. Yeah, how often does it happen? Yeah. Okay, so, but there is still stuff we can do. Yeah, if you look in your context, usually there is something. Yeah. And then the emerging trends and future directions. Lots of these talk about artificial intelligence. But now let's say remote work first. Now, COVID time, everybody was impressed how remote work was effective. And now it's like back to the office to be more productive, which is bullshit. I said that before already. It's just a different modality. And you can work very well. I have direct experience with that. I have direct experience with large-scale agile and remote distributed teams, successful with the COVID app. So can work. It's not a matter if it works, but it's how do you make it work? How do you adapt what you do? Yeah? Okay? And small things, hybrid work. Hybrid work, it doesn't matter if you're in the office or at home. Any call, everybody at their own laptop, yeah, at their own screen. Because even if you have a single person away, you don't want to be everybody in a room and a single person away on the screen, because this makes some strange dynamics. Apart from the visuals and audio that becoming quite bad, but the dynamics are very different. It's like the people in the room are kind of become almost like a team with a separate, some kind of bad word there. Yeah. So this kind of stuff. You can do things. You can use this to your advantage also to mob in the office, as we do. Sitting at your desk on your screen, you can do kind of remote mobbing in the office. You don't need a separate room. And you can still do that with the people in the office and somebody at home, which incidentally, this is what we are doing at the moment where I am. And then with the ones in the office, you can have lunch together. You can have a coffee. Okay, so you can actually mix the two quite nicely. Yeah, you don't need to go to the office to share a room to do mobbing. It's unnecessary, actually inconvenient, because if you have to book the room and you don't find one, it's quite annoying. Yeah, and the tools are pretty good. So there are all these things. So remote work is here to stay, and I actually think is a good thing. Besides, allows companies to actually hire people from a wider pool of talent. Yeah. Artificial intelligence, lots of talk about this, also the keynote today. Now, artificial intelligence, I'm not as confident as many others about the great possibilities. To me, it's something that is useful and probably will become more useful, but will do much less than what many say or think. Yeah, it's not going to change our jobs fundamentally. Yeah, because you see, now I read all sorts of stuff. Artificial intelligence creating user stories and refining them. He's trained on humans. Yeah, can you imagine your product owner talking with artificial intelligence system and then getting the system out? I don't think that will work nicely. Yeah, it's just not going to work. Or even with the developers, I'll show you a slide in terms of productivity. Depending on how you ask, you have numbers that are all over the place. If you ask a vendor, everything is great. If you ask somebody else, is kind of different. So one thing that I saw is this, I put the website there. Actually, some surveys different from the ones. And I say, well, basically, use it depending on what you do, actually increase the bug rate, increase all sorts of problems. There are some studies that say, you know what? Yeah, overall you increase productivity of your developers, but you know how much? Really a lot, 4%. Now, I can tell you how to increase that productivity by even 50%. That is, tell those people what to do, which direction you want to pull in them to. Yeah, give them your strategy, your vision, and clear goals, and focus. And I can guarantee you, then you can go probably even to 50% in most cases. And you don't need AI for that. Yeah. Okay, it's useful. You can be useful for many things, but things, I tell you also, a company some time ago, they contacted me. They wanted to demo me the fantastic AI tool. After they harassed me for a while, I said, okay, yes, give me the demo. And the tool, what the tool did was, we have this platform where you write the platform what you want, and we'll create 80% of the system you need. So the automated, the dream of every product manager. And then the demo was, the guy shares the screen with the platform and says, this is the demo, but we cannot change anything. And then I started asking questions, okay, we can change. I understand technical problems, whatever. But then start asking questions, say, what kind of code this thing generates? Because if my company creates software for others, for other companies, for customers, we need to give them the code. It has to be decent to be maintained by somebody. Well, maybe we can transfer the code from your account to their account. Say, no, let's be clear. They might not be interested in having an account on your platform. They want the code. So what do you... yeah, you can do that. Oh, okay, good. What about the quality? What should I expect? I say, well, we cannot really guarantee this. We go use the Copilot and things. I say, what do you mean? Bugs? Well, we can say 80, 90% bug free. I say, hold on. Now, if I use an automated system to do something for me, I have to be able to trust the system. I cannot create something, tell me, create me an entire system, and then says 90% code bug free. But then I have to review the entire thing myself to figure out the bugs. Yeah? It's like, it's much easier for me to actually write the thing myself without reviewing your system. Yeah. So you see what is happening there? Or the companies that, well, it will write the test for you. Okay, now, I have some friends that are experimenting there, but in a different way, say, in a kind of TDD way. Say, create the test, let's create the test together. Now, okay, this is the test. Give me the code that passes that. And with different levels of satisfaction in the results. But some companies are selling code that say, you will not write the test. You give the AI your code, and that will create the test for you. And some people are buying it. Now, think about this. I give this system my code. The system says, I created the test for you. You know what? Every single bug will become a feature. As simple as that. Now, that could be useful for legacy system, if you want the characterization test before refactoring something. But if it is new code, this is exactly what you do not want at all costs. You see, so there is a lot of conversation around this stuff, and a lot of it is nonsense. Yeah, this is what annoys me. Is useful in many occasions, but is not what is sold to be. Yeah, so I don't really buy all this will be so fundamental in the way we do things. I may be proven wrong, in which case, if I'll be fine, I don't have a problem with that, but I don't think I will be. So, conclusion, answering the initial question, are we there yet? No, there is still a lot to do. Yeah, okay? But it's not about post-agile, new agile, new things. It's more about, can we start, doing things in a more sensible manner? Yeah, it's not about new methods, new approaches, new anything. We know how we humans work and how we work well. Let's start using this, yeah, and start to be a bit more focused and more sensible. Yeah, it's not rocket science. It's not about inventing any new methods. Yeah, and then will Agile be replaced by something else? Yes, probably by something with a different name, but pretty much the same substance, possibly rediscovering old ideas again. I'm sure about that. Somebody will come up with a new name for stuff. Happens all the time. Yeah. And then the final question that is actually, will I change drastically what we do? No. And I'm done.